it's remember that the seller's dignity is actually part of the deal. You're not just negotiating a price and terms, you're actually negotiating a relationship. And so you want to protect that buyer's dignity. If you want to inherit or acquire more than assets, you actually want to acquire their loyalty, right? Another way to think about that is you're negotiating your relationship and your reputation, right? Not just the economics. And then for the sellers, I think we've already covered the main thing. Start preparing ideally 2 years in a small way before you think you need to, and just increase that over time, especially in the 12 months before you want to contact buyers. The best exits are actually won in the invisible phases of outfitting and preparation phase, not the marketing and controlled auction phase.
Welcome to the How to Buy or Sell a Business Successfully podcast. The concepts discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only. No attorney-client relationship is intended or formed by this podcast. No legal advice is intended in the substance of this podcast. Feel free to check out our website, www.goforemanlaw.com. Enjoy the show and welcome your hosts, Jake Wayman and Sam Foreman.
Well, welcome back to another episode of How to Buy and Sell a Business Successfully podcast. I always mess that up. We're just going to keep rolling with it. My name is Jake Wayman, and my wife and I are the proud owners of the Orange Theory Fitness Studios here in Wichita, Kansas. I also serve as a fractional business development executive for a couple of companies, helping them grow their top-line revenue. One of them is my family's company, Citywide Facility Solutions, and I also work with an investment bank out of Oklahoma City called Infinity Capital Partners. Best thing going on in my life right now is I love coaching my kids. So I coach my 4-year-old soccer team. But the funny thing about all this is I never played soccer growing up. And so I have no idea. I'm actually chat GPT and like, okay, what is a good practice program for a 4-year-old? Good thing is we only practice 30 minutes before games, and they have a 30-minute game. So their attention span is very short. But it's funny when one of the parents came up to me and was like, well, what are you doing? I was like, well, if you want to come coach, there's a place right here for you to come help me. But that's been a whirlwind of learning soccer for the first time in my life after, 37 years of not playing it.
Hey, Jake, I have a friend who coached soccer for the first time recently after never playing it. He also went to ChatGPT and he found a practice drill where you have the whole point of the drill is to keep the ball away from some subset of the kids.
Okay.
And so you have some who are trying to keep the ball away from a few others. And then of course they can switch sides. Well, that actually is a really effective way to bring the ball up the field and ultimately score, right?
Yeah.
Where you're in an advantageous position. And so that's literally his primary go-to drill in practice. And I think they won all their games convincingly, despite the fact that they were the first time coach.
Right on.
Because the other players couldn't get the ball. And if they can't get the ball, they can't score. Right.
All right. Taking notes. We have we have a game on Saturday. So I'm using that. There we go.
Well, and I'm Sam Foreman, founder of Foreman Law. And I did play soccer in high school. And if I were volunteered to coach a youth soccer league right now, I would also go to ChatGPT to look up drills, with the exception of the one I just learned about from Kevon. So thank you very much. One of the best things going on in my life right now is our 8-year-old is such a creative child. He has pushed me into telling this ongoing series of stories about a character called Cactus Pants, who is an alien who time travels. It's a wonderful, wonderful story. I think we're probably, kid you not, probably 30 to 40 hours into this ongoing story. Wow. And we just recorded some of this story.
Yeah.
I didn't know we were recording it at the time, but he has a little iPod and it allows you to record some stuff. Yeah. And so we're like driving and he's like, speak louder. So recorded that. But I just love seeing his creativity and his zeal for life. And it's just such a wonderful, wonderful, beautiful thing to see. We're very fortunate today to be joined by Kevon Saber, and he does a lot of work with folks centered around the sales process and helping them have a successful exit, and doing so in a way that's very aligned with their values and the values of their clients, and have just really enjoyed getting to know him a little bit and learn more about their process. Kevon, why don't you tell our audience a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do, and what's one of the best things going on in your life right now?
Sure. Thanks, Sam and Jake. So I spent most of my career building software companies in Silicon Valley before we moved to the South in 2013. At one point, after selling a company to private equity, a friend who became a mentor on a board that we were both serving on, this was a construction company, he said, I think you should consider going into M&A because there are millions of business owners around the country who are going to have outcomes when they sell that are going to fill them with regrets. Either they're not going to sell, which of course happens to 70% of business owners, or they're going to sell and 24% of the remaining 30 are going to have regrets over how they sold. So you can protect many business owners' legacy if you would join me in serving these entrepreneurs, these business owners in such a pivotal stage of their life. And obviously I decided to kind of sort of accept the challenge. And it's been literally so invigorating to be in the sort of cockpit or riding shotgun with business owners in a position that I am used to being in, and counsel them through and ultimately help them to succeed in their sale process in ways that they don't have any regrets. This morning, I'm thinking about the best thing happening in my life. This morning, I was sitting with my wife and our 4 daughters out on the patio over breakfast, and there's a little binder of prayers that my wife and I have been praying for a long time. We hadn't looked at this page for many years, and the prayer was about having a home that we could invite others into in various forms of hospitality, and have our children laughing and cuddling with us. And that's exactly what we had been doing, over the last 20 minutes after dinner, just kind of joking around, horsing around, tickling each other. So it was just a really sweet moment that reminded me, wow, this prayer we prayed a long time ago has actually come to fruition. So that was a sweet moment.
Man, that's awesome. I love it. Well, Kevon, tell us a little bit about your experience guiding business owners through a sale, and what are some of the most critical steps you take before going to market to ensure that they're deal ready, not just financially, operationally, but also on a personal and a mental level?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, when we're seeking to maximize their outcomes when they sell, we're typically going to start coaching them 1 to 2 years out before we actually start contacting buyers. And we think about that pre-marketing of the business time frame really in 2 parts. There's the outfitting part and the preparing part. The outfitting, think about this like a mountain climber, is when you're deciding on your gear, you're coming up with your game plan, you're determining your team. Whereas the preparing is actually begins at base camp, and it's a lot more based on the work that happened before. So, outfitting, obviously we're thinking about maximizing not only the EBITDA multiples, but other factors like, what do you really want for the employees? And what will your mission be after you sell? Because we see the best outcomes come when a business owner is not just running from something, they're actually running towards something, right? And that's going to vary by business owner. Let's come back to that topic in a little bit. But during that outfitting phase, we're really focused on it's 10 things typically. Every business is unique, so sometimes we put more emphasis on one or the other. We swap one of these out with something else, and it's the things that you guys talk about regularly. It's low interdependency, where the business is running as much as possible without their involvement, with strong management, reducing key man risk or key person risk, as much recurring revenue as possible, as scalable of a business as possible, where you're not going to have parts of the machine breaking as a buyer comes in and doubles, triples, quadruples the business, because they have an existing sales force. They have a much bigger marketing reach. They have big distribution partners, and so on and so forth. Of course, strong systems, efficient, automated processes that ensure consistency and less overhead as far as managing the business. robust documentation, right, around the financials, the SOPs, the contracts, all are helpful in 100 ways, including building trust with the ultimate buyers and streamlining the diligence. We think a lot about, of course, diversification. Again, in terms of mitigating risk for the buyers, obviously ever-growing revenues and margins, a stable workforce where there's evidence that people actually want to be there, right, for the indefinite future. We pay a lot of attention to the legal and regulatory factors. We don't want to see any litigation or compliance issues that, again, are creating risk for the buyers. And then the last piece is what we started touching on a minute ago. When you look at the business owners who sell, for a lot of them, it's the opposite of what you hear about selling a boat, right? When you sell a boat, it's the best day of your, of your boating life, right?
Right.
When you sell a business, in many cases, it's an entree into misery because you no longer have a sense of mission. You have lost your sense of identity. And I saw a stat recently. I need to go and dig into the research because I think it probably had enough qualifications that made this percentage really high. But it said that business owners, CEOs are often dead after 2 years. 50% of them are dead after 2 years. So maybe that was for people over 60, or maybe that was for business owners who owned more than X% of the company and were over 60. So I got to go dig into that. But the point is, we all know people who sold and then were miserable because they didn't have a sense of, this is what I feel called to do next, right? And so we try to spend time with them clarifying their vision. It doesn't have to be a 100-page plan. It doesn't even need to be written down, but what do they feel called to, right? So that's kind of how we think about the outfitting stage. Before we talk about the preparation phase, which happens typically in the 6 months to 9 months before we start marketing to buyers, we can do it in less, though. Let me pause and see if you have any questions.
Well, and kind of what you're talking about here on those 10 things, I mean, you're really talking about what Sam and I talk a lot about is what value are you able to transfer over to the ultimate buyer? Because that's really what they're looking for, is what value are you taking and providing over to the potential buyer organization? Because, you know, that's where things fall apart, because if the value is not created and is not able to be transferred, then most likely the acquisition or the sell is not going to happen because you haven't taken the time to understand what value do I really have in this business that a buyer wants. I mean, you may have good multiples, but again, if you don't have a lot of the things that you're talking about, then there may not be a good business for the next person to be able to take on and, grow it or maintain it or what have you. So it's a lot about that transfer of value.
I have a follow-up question for you. When you talk about people facing the void, if you will, they've sold this business and now there's just sort of nothing there. What is it that you think leads business owners to that place where that is the reality for them, that they just don't even know who they are anymore, or they don't have a sense of purpose on the other side of ownership?
Yeah, I think there's a few factors. And if we have time, I'd love to come back to what you said, Jake, around transferability. I think one factor that's very important and very consistent is just not having an identity that they have developed, that they have determined, that they have defined. And therefore, the identity is what others have told them, right, for so long. Whether it's, this is what Fortune magazine, right, says should be your identity, or this is what the commercials you're seeing while you're watching football is telling you your identity should be, or perhaps it's something that your dad or mom told you 40 years ago. Those are all inputs, they're hypotheses, but ultimately I think we need to come to grips with, where do I get my self-worth from? Is that something that is temporal or temporary, like a title or a role, or is that something that no one can take away from me? Like when I built my first company, we didn't sell that one. We had 4 co-founders, and 4 years into it, I realized that there was a disconnect or a divergence of values between some of the founders and others. And I decided, well, instead of fighting over the business, I'll just leave and let them run it the way they want to run it. But I was depressed for the next 2 weeks because my identity was being the celebrated entrepreneur who was featured in various media outlets. It was not connected to anything permanent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so as I wrestled and prayed and studied, I ultimately came to the conclusion, all right, my identity, everyone needs to define this for themselves. My identity is as a child of God, right? It's I'm loved and unconditionally, and period. Nothing more, nothing less, right? I have other functions, other callings, but I'm going to do my best to live out of that identity. And of course, I've done a better job on some days and a worse job on most days. But I think people have to figure that out for themselves. I think the next factor is thinking about, so we talked about identity. The next factor is mission. What do they feel like they're uniquely called to do on this earth? Like, I have a lot of missions outside of work, right? I have a mission and a calling as a husband. I have a mission and a calling as a father. I have a role to play literally as a member of my neighborhood and the community that we have here, among others, right? And so for a lot of business owners, we don't see them experiencing that misery or that frustration or that despondency, because they say, all right, I want to now go from being the CEO of this company to the CEO of my family. And I'm thinking about generations, right? Them, they're not just their kids, but their grandkids. I want to foster cohesion. I want to foster a sense of mission. I want to foster, clear values that my kids and grandkids and perhaps great grandkids will embrace. And out of the same intentionality that I use to bring this business to 5 or 15 or 55 million in revenue, I want to have a family that is close and all rowing in the same direction, trying to make the world better in particular ways that we're excited about as a group, right? And so that obviously takes intentionality, that takes time. A lot of them say, all right, I want to move on to a phase where I'm mentoring other younger entrepreneurs or sitting on nonprofit boards and helping them be more effective. All of those are different missions, but they're all fulfilling for someone who cares about those. So I think identity and mission are probably the two biggest ways that we see business owners transitioning from a sense of purpose while they're running the company to a real sense of purpose afterward.
I love that. I think there's so much clarity that comes from that. And I can really see how that would have a positive impact on, the personal lives, but also the outcomes for folks. I mean, when we, work with people on deals, we're talking about like, what is their personal scorecard? Because one of our goals as a law firm is to help our clients create as much value as possible, but that looks different for everybody. But in order to know what value is, you have to really know yourself. You have to really know what, a lot of those things are that you just described, because then you can define value in a way that allows you to communicate with your advisors to, help maximize the value that's created. Because if you don't know that, then it's just like you said, you're looking at Fortune magazine, you're looking at, what your buddy says or what everyone else is telling you, or you're just responding to the moment instead of being very purposeful and intentional with like, hey, no, here's who I am. I'm anchored outside of, my identity as a worker or as a business owner. And I'm actually aligning everything that I'm doing with what I'm called to and with what the big picture is. And the business doesn't become the what, it becomes the how. Instead, it just becomes a means towards that bigger picture that you're working towards. And I think there's just a tremendous amount of freedom and a lot of value in there. And so I love what you're talking about there. I think it's so important. I think it's something that gets missed a lot. You talked about that statistic of, whatever subset that is of former business owners or CEOs that are dead in 2 years. The legal profession, I don't know exactly what the statistic is, but there's a lot of anecdotes about, attorneys that they retire and then they die because they were just workers. They're just constantly programmed themselves to that. And I think that's a miserable existence for anyone, regardless of what their core identity is. But I think it's so we as humans are so deeply linked to a need for meaning. And that when we lose sight of it, or we anchor our meaning to something that's transient, like business ownership, for example, we're just setting ourselves up to create a vacuum that's exceptionally destructive instead of creating a new space in which beautiful things can happen.
Yeah, I think you said that so clearly. I believe we're called to work, we're called to create, we're called to make it more efficient, but it's dangerous when we see that as our only calling or our only source of meaning.
Right.
I had a friend who asked me the famous Peter Thiel question not too long ago. She said, what do you believe that almost no one else believes? And I said, I think that when I was a lot younger, I thought that meaning came from doing. And so I was a human doing, right? As far as ultimately what I found as purposeful. And then I kind of shifted toward a human being. And that's where I tried to find purpose. And over time, I think I've said, well, those are both important, but maybe the higher, more fulfilling opportunity or lens is a human relating. It's actually my connection, right? With others that is the most fulfilling thing in my life.
No, that's really interesting. Very cool.
Jake and Sam here.
Thank you for joining us. If you find this content helpful, please like, subscribe, share it with a friend, and especially leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or iTunes. Really helps us out a lot.
Yeah, 1 star, it's on Sam.
Yeah, it's definitely on me. Kevon, you've talked before about this idea of the kind of the 7 deadly assumptions that sellers can make as they're looking at kind of their business and readiness and just deal process and those kind of things. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that broader idea and what some of those are for folks?
Yeah, happy to talk about those. We try to address those, especially in the preparation phase that comes after the outfitting phase. And so I'd love to unpack those assumptions and then come back to the other really important parts of the preparation phase, just to equip your audience to think through those factors for themselves, if we have time for it. So
Sure.
7 deadly assumptions. The first one is selling my business is like selling my house. Really selling
Completely
a business.
True.
If it's a $500,000 business, there's actually a fair amount in common, right? But the larger the business becomes, the less in common it has with selling a house. It goes from being a mass exposure transaction to being a campaign that requires choreography, timing, discretion, and confidentiality, and ultimately leverage to achieve a peak outcome. Deadly assumption number 2 is I can grow my business and sell it at the same time. I believe that, and I have the scars and money on the table to prove it. The reality is that you can do that, and there's actually nothing that's rocket science about selling a business, but the growth of the business, both top line and bottom line, actually delivers a higher ROI on the owner's time than running their own sale. And that's why sellers who represent themselves typically leave between 20 and 35% of the enterprise value on the table. It's a really innocent mistake because you think, I'm good at business, I've gotten the business to this place, and therefore I'll be successful at selling my business. It's a assumption that the massive private equity industry obviously profits on, because your first rodeo is not the rodeo you're going to be the best at. And most business owners have one sale rodeo, if any, in their life, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that assumption alone right there is so powerful because, what value looks like on day 1 of them starting a process to sell their business. And if they're doing it by themselves without any advisors next to them, fast forward, 6 months from the close of the sale, and when they're in due diligence, they're going to say, well, something changed over this time. And what changed was the owner stopped focusing on the business. They stopped doing what they were supposed to be doing. And again, that's why you align yourself with people like yourself, or like with what we do at Infinity, and making sure that you're aligned on that, because there's a process and there needs to be. That's why we've talked about this all the time, your deal team. Who is on your deal team, and how do you surround yourself with the right advisors to make that transaction happen? So sorry I interrupted your assumptions. That's just one of mine that I think they can do it themselves, but it's like, no, you can't.
Well, you can. It's just the cost of doing it is so high.
You're losing so much.
You're taking your just like you said, Kevon, your highest return is your ability to focus on something that you are better at than nobody else, which is running your business.
Yeah.
And you're going to take that and you're going to exchange it for something you've never done before, have no experience with, that's going to distract and diminish from your highest and best return, and do it for something that you could pay somebody else to do. And your every dollar of EBITDA that you lose, up to a point, because then it accelerates in terms of the price reduction, is going to take, depending on your business, anywhere from 3 to 15 times off of, your sale price.
Yeah.
Assuming that's what's most important to you. So.
Yeah. When my mentor sold his first company, the buyer just buried them in due diligence requests and meetings to exacerbate the factor that you were describing, Jake, which is taking their eye off the ball. And so what happened? Yes, revenue growth slipped. There were other aspects that did not perform as well during diligence. And the seller, in this case, my mentor, had a huge haircut on the valuation.
Yeah.
And so he left that experience thinking, okay, never again will I be so naive.
Yeah.
The next one is that buyers pay primarily for historical performance. Obviously, they pay first and foremost for what they can do with your business, right?
Yeah.
Given its fit, growth, risk profile. It's not just about what you've done. Kind of relatedly is number 4, all that matters is the price. And of course, the structure, the timing, the tax treatment, the contingencies. And Sam, as a attorney, you know about post-sale liability, right? All those things are equally important along with the price. In fact, the high offer in many cases can be a trap if so much of it is contingent. What we tell business owners regularly is what you keep, when you keep it, and what is required for you to keep it is just as important as the price.
Right. No, I mean 100% on that, because at the end of the day, that's what you have to show for it is what did you keep, and unless the top of your scorecard is the vanity metric of, oh well, I sold my business for X, which means it's not really about sale price, it's about what other people think about you, and that's a call you get to make as a business owner, but you need to be honest with yourself that that's what you're doing, instead of being satisfied with and focusing on what is it that I actually get to keep in my pocket at the end.
Yeah, pride cometh before a fall, right?
Yes.
So number 5 is that buyers pay for speculative future performance. It's sort of the inverse of only pay for historical, right? Buyers, as you know, discount promises. They pay for credible evidence of growth, an expanding pipeline, new contracts, a strong team, the market growing. I'm sure you see this a lot, Jake, in your fractional revenue growth roles that you described earlier. And so, yeah, we really focus, especially during that outfitting phase, on those credible markers of growth or actual evidence of growth, as opposed to these totally rosy assumptions they want us to put into the forecast, which obviously we don't do.
It's mathemagical.
Exactly. Yeah. If it were that easy, then the business would have already grown, right?
Yeah.
Yep. 100%.
The next one is one of the saddest assumptions in my view. It's that my M&A advisor, whether it's a broker or an M&A team, will always act in my best interests. The vast majority of brokers and M&A teams and investment banks are totally conflicted, right? Because they're getting paid in some way, shape, or form by the buyer. And if they're getting paid by the buyer, then they're not loyal to the seller because the buyer is the repeat customer. There's not a dual loyalty. It's not an equal loyalty. It is a flat out, orientation to the customer who's going to pay them over and over and over again. When one of my partners sold his company to a public company, it was his first sale, of course, and who knows if he would ever have a sale again. That public company bought 66 companies that year. So if
that's
you just
a lot.
About
for listeners, that's a lot.
Yeah, if you just think about the expected probability for that broker, in this case, who over the next 5 years, he's going to make probably 5 or 10 times as much by making that buyer really happy, right? So the key is to only work with someone who has a fiduciary responsibility to you because they're exclusively sell side, right?
Yeah. And
go ahead, Sam. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I was interrupting you. So, I mean, just to echo some of that, something that, if you're a seller and you're looking at who is a great fit on your team as an M&A advisor, is being really mindful of that. Because even if you're not worried about that type of scenario, like Kevon just mentioned, of the broker might deal with this buyer over and over again. Most brokers structure their financial arrangements to where it's contingent on the outcome, right? And so even if they're not in that situation where they're going to work with that buyer again, like they get paid when you close, right? Like a lot of them get paid when you sell the business. And so you've got to know that you're going in. That's the way that's just the market standard. It's very rare to have something different than that. It doesn't make it a bad thing, but it just means that you need to have a really high level of trust. And you need to be really diligent about who you align yourself with, and they need to fit your values so that you're confident that they're not going to help you close your deal just because it's good for them. They're going to do it because they know it's the right thing to do and it's the best thing for you, and that they've positioned their business to be successful on that basis primarily, as opposed to one where it's like, hey, just got to close. Because we see that over and over again, where, especially in small business M&A, I'd say it's much less common when you get it a little bit larger, because you get just a different, it's just a different dynamic. And,
and I think even on that side, when you're looking to sell your business and you do want to enlist a broker, investment bank, or whatever, I mean, like, go interview a few of them, go go ask for past references, people they've done business with in the past and what that experience was like. Because again, like you said, Kevon, this may be the only time they will ever transact their business. So it's a very important decision and a very important part of their life that they need to make sure it's done in a way that fits their values, fits, what they're wanting to accomplish out of it. And so, I mean, don't rush that. I mean, that's again, like where you're talking about, is you enter in the conversation with business owners, 2 years prior to them actually making the transaction, because there's a lot that needs to be done 2 years prior. Cause us as with Infinity, with ours, is we usually only get involved, right when they've been prepared, they're ready to go to market. They've already been doing the prep work prior to that. And so, there's a lot, you should be preparing for your business to sell, 24 to 36 months before you're going to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Some of the questions you can ask based on your priorities, right, are what actually is your probability of selling? In other words, for every client you've taken on, what percent have you sold? And the market average, depending on the enterprise value, is going to be anywhere between 18% and 47%. The higher the value of the company, the higher the percentage. And so you can literally compare, are they better or worse than average? And most brokers, most M&A firms don't even publish that data because they're not different than the average, right? Or they're worse than the average in some cases. So I like to actually encourage business owners to just say, do they publish the data to begin with? Are they transparent about that?
Yeah.
And then, of course, the second question related to price, or related to performance is, well, what percent of the time are you beating the upfront valuation you gave those owners, right? Of the 30% of business owners who try to sell and sell, because 70% don't sell, 24%, so 24 out of the 30% who sell have regrets over how they sold. So that's, if you ask them why, or you look at the data on why, the number one reason is because they left money on the table. Why do they think they left money on the table? Because the broker or M&A firm gave them a higher price to win the business than they actually delivered, right? 84% of the time we sell the companies for above the 75th percentile of the range we provide, which is to say, we'd rather someone choose us not because of the price we gave up front, because they believe in our process, because they say, wow, your process focuses almost as much. I want to be honest, it's not as much, but almost as much on will my employees be well treated after the sale as it does getting the very best prices in the offers that are generated through our control auction, right? They know that our process is going to pay more attention to the cohesion of the family than most other peers that are in the market. They know that we're going to talk them through and involve their wealth manager through conversations around their charitable priorities, so that those charities are getting the money pre-tax and typically it's a donor advised fund, are receiving a percentage of the company pre LOI. And some people are excited about that, but others don't care about it. My point is, you really want to understand the process that's going to be used, and how much that lines up with your priorities. So one of the things that gets overlooked a lot is confidentiality. Right? Back to the business sale not being like a house sale. With a house, you want as many eyeballs on that Zillow listing as possible, right? Well, you don't want your competitors, your employees, and your vendors learning about your sale before you tell them with the narrative you have for them. It's not something you want them to discover, because competitors will try to poach your customers and your employees, saying, you don't know who's going to be running this company. Employees are going to get nervous, and vendors are going to tighten the screws, right, on you, because you're in a risky proposition. They know that the buyers are going to be looking at continuity around everything from the pricing to the exact suppliers and whether there's been a lot of turnover there. So they know they kind of have you in a compromised position. So a good M&A firm is not going to blast this, all over the world. They're going to blast it to the buyers, not the competitors, who are likely to pay the most for the company.
Yeah. Yeah. And the biggest thing on that is like when we run our process with Infinity, I mean, we will build a buyer list, but then we go work with the business owner. Hey, this is who we've come up with. Are there ones you want us to pull off of there? What's the story about that? Because there's a lot of relationships in smaller industries. Everybody knows everybody. And so like, that's where you want to be very critical with that. I mean, that's something that, you're preaching to the choir on that one with our organization with Infinity is, I mean, it's so much about that confidentiality, that trust that needs to be built there. Because, if that trust isn't built there, then, you're going to have a failed deal. Again, that value is going to be lost in that process.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that you've kind of talked about here, Kevon, that I think is so important is for people to go into the process with a really clear understanding, or to be prepared as they get into the process with a really clear understanding of what it is that matters most to them, and to do that on purpose. Because for most sellers, like, you're doing this once. Like, this is a deeply personal experience that you get to do once in your life. And you need advisors that aren't just going to go through and, you're just a billing number to them. You want to connect with people who align with your values, who are going to help you understand what's at stake and make sure you get to a really good result. Because I think there's a lot of people, it's not just like, did they leave money on the table? I think a lot of business owners get to that place where they didn't pay attention to what the buyer was going to do with their people. Mm-hmm. And then they look back and they see the people that are looking for work, and they look at the impact that it had on their hometown, instead of, being something that helped continue to, thrive and flourish. It's something where, it just got gutted and ripped out, and that wasn't something that they knew or expected to have happen. And so the process happened to them instead of them happening to the process.
Yeah, that's said so clearly, Sam. When we start our preparation process, this is post the outfitting phase, we literally will sit down with the business owner, ideally with their spouse, in different rooms. And if they have multiple business owners, we try to start the conversation with them in separate places. And we'll lay out these 15 cards on the table. Each card is a different objective. And we say, first, we want you to separate these 15 objectives into 3 piles: high, medium, and low priority. And then we ask them to explain why they put them in those piles. Inevitably, as we clarify and ask them follow-up questions, they're going to move some cards around. And eventually we're going to end up with 5 cards in the high pile that are force ranked. Mm-hmm. Well, for us in our process, everything we do after that, from the buyer targeting that you talked about, Jake, to how we build the forecasts, to the guidance we offer to buyers who are thinking about making an offer, to even the positioning of the company and what strategic, operational, and financial building blocks we're highlighting, are dependent on those top 5 objectives. And so, of course, after we have those separate conversations, we bring people together, and they'll say things to us when they're separate that are different from when they're together, right? So we like to get all those perspectives out, and then we reconcile them, and we end up with, again, that top 5. And then everything we do will be built on those top 5 objectives. That's not to say we don't pay any attention to number 6 or number 9. It's to say that one matters a lot more than the rest. And so it needs to have that level of primacy in all those subsequent steps.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I love that. How you break it down to like, the story that you tell when you're going through a process, it's built on what they value, because it could be, and that's, I love that how you go about that process.
Yeah. No, I have many things to say on this subject, because I think it's so powerful and it's so important.
Hey, real quick, if someone wants to see those 15 objectives, because we're not going to have time to cover them today, they're under the Owner's Edge section of our website, and under that, and in that section of our site, they can also actually get this whole stack of 52 cards, which is really a primer on sell-side M&A that goes into a lot of the topics we're discussing today in more detail.
Awesome. And would you share with our audience your website, please?
It's Legacy Outcomes. That's plural. LegacyOutcomes.com.
Excellent. Thank you. For all of our listeners, as you're thinking about this process, and this is why, the team that you pick is so important, is that all of the value that you create is the result of decisions that you make. And if you're trying to make all those decisions on your own and trying to do it for the first time, you're just not going to have the results that you have when you have an experienced team that's walked that road before, that's learned a ton of stuff. And so you owe it to yourself to kind of check out folks like Kevon to see who's the right fit that's going to help you make those great decisions. The other thing I'd add, and this is why I really like your process a lot, especially in this regard, is you can't have a limitless number of priorities. You don't get to pick. Everything can't be equally important. It's all important. It's all high stakes, but you've got to pick the most important.
But damn, if someone wants to treat the 15 as equal and they won't actually prioritize them, we're not going to work with them. Because that is revealing an unwillingness to prioritize, an unwillingness to make decisions. And to your point, we have to make we have to make 100 high quality decisions. It's not all equal in importance to have an excellent outcome. And frankly, just selfishly, we want to protect our stats, right? And so we're not going to risk our stats with someone who has that level of fuzziness. Those decisions are really, really about are different parts of the preparation process. So if we have time for it, I'd love to kind of just expand a little bit on what we do after the outfitting stage before the company goes to market, because the preparation phase is actually the most important. So I want to give it a little bit of oxygen. So we already talked about clarifying the goals for the team, the real estate, the sale price, the cash out, the time frame. So I won't spend any more time on that. The next is the forensic analysis. That's where we're doing a really deep dive on the operations, financials, market. Half of that motivation is to uncover the hidden risks, the skeletons that could torpedo the sale, right? Or cause a huge haircut or a retrade during diligence. But half of it, conversely, is to supercharge the sale by understanding those operational, financial, strategic building blocks that we can position differently for different buyers. So we're selling a medical device company right now. What's uncommon in our space is what we've done, which is we have 3 different presentations. We have different forecasts for these different buyer types. Each one doesn't have any information that the other ones don't have, but it's a matter of emphasis. We're emphasizing different components to the strategic buyers than the private equity buyers, than the search fund buyers in this case. Now, all that analysis, of course, reduces a typical diligence period of 3 months, 4 months, sometimes even 6 months, to typically 45 days, because we have laid it all out on a silver platter for those buyers in an effort to get a higher price and lower the risk. But it also has a side benefit or byproduct of shortening the diligence phase.
So, Kevon, if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying is different buyers want different things, and you can't sell them as a seller what you want. You need to sell them what they want.
The most important factor in selling your business for what it's worth is looking at your business through the eyes of a buyer, not through the eyes of as a builder or as the operator, right?
Right.
Now, the reality is every company has those skeletons that could torpedo the sale.
Sure.
It's about handling them long before, diligence.
Clean the closet.
We call that pre-diligence or forensic diligence. The next part of this base camp phase is getting the right people on the bus, right? And we have what we call a core team and an extended team. So the core team are our M&A team members that are in the trenches every day. The extended team are the specialists that do something that our team doesn't do. We're not lawyers, right? And so we say, all right, you need an M&A lawyer, just like someone might need a heart surgeon. You don't need a general purpose lawyer who does 1,001 things, wills and estates, and they do contracts, they do some litigation. That person's a generalist. M&A is a specialized field. So we find someone like you, Sam. So that's on the extended team. The wealth managers on the extended team. Obviously, sometimes we have specialist accountants, people who are doing quality of earnings, for example, in many cases, especially for the larger businesses on that extended team. The core team that we're bringing to the table is a transition architect. And in our firm, every firm's different. We require the transition architects to have their own 8-figure at least sale under their belt. You cannot be promoted to that level in our firm unless you've done that size deal, because you can relate to the owners, you can understand the pitfalls, you have your own regrets that just enable you to see things differently. But more important than that, it's really a measure of how effective have you been as an entrepreneur, because the entrepreneur sees opportunities that the financial jockey doesn't. They see buyers who are going to value a particular component of the company, some operational lever, some angle that will be useful to those buyers. Again, that if you're just looking at spreadsheets all day, you're not going to see. So the transition architect is the quarterback, they're the head coach who are orchestrating all of the 7 stages, starting with the preparation phase and even beforehand, the pre-preparation phase, which is outfitting. They're not drafting complex tax scenarios. They're not drafting legal documents. They're relying on specialists for that technical execution. The enterprise value analyst, that's a controller level accounting specialist that's really focused on the financial, value sources. They're doing the analysis, they're stress testing deal structures, they're looking at benchmarks against industry comparables. They're creating a bulletproof valuation up front that obviously anchors the buyer conversation and protects the seller from retrades. We have a positioning and engagement specialist on every business that we're selling. They're crafting those buyer-specific narratives that you were kind of underscoring a minute ago, Sam, that says to the specific buyers, here's why this is not just another opportunity. This is why this is indispensable for the strategy that you've called out in your general partner to LP communications or your earnings calls or your annual reports, right? We're mapping the business to the mandate that they've communicated for their business. And then we have a buyer intelligence lead, and they're doing that research and actually qualifying the buyers. They're looking at the annual reports and the earnings calls and the private equity communications to their LPs. So anyway, that's the first part, right? That we call base camp of the preparation phase. Real quickly, the value enhancement phase is about identifying low-hanging fruit to increase the business value. It's weighing internal timing factors like the health of key stakeholders, the leadership bandwidth, obviously capital needs that the company has, before we're going into market positioning, which is recasting the expenses to boost the buyer's EBITDA definition, and ultimately turning all that research into buyer category positioning. Again, that's unique to each buyer.
No, that's great.
That's kind of how we think about the preparation phase: base camp, value enhancement, and market positioning.
Mm-hmm. No, that's terrific. I know we've got just a couple minutes left. Would you hit on the process that you've described before of the seller power path?
Yeah, the seller's power path is the inverse of those assumptions we talked about, right? It's also the inverse of the seller's path to regrets. The seller's power path starts with preparation, and really it starts whenever possible with that outfitting stage that happens before the preparation. After preparation, we move on to create. That's where we're creating those narratives and forecasts for specific buyers. The attract phase is where our positioning specialist is reaching out to the buyers with those narratives that are unique to them. Mm-hmm. The evaluation phase is we're evaluating the offers on many dimensions, including what is the probability of netting different levels of proceeds, how well will this buyer actually care for and treat the employees, and so on and so forth. The next phase is leverage, where we are driving the offers up by negotiating with the best offers at the same time. And the last phase is legacy. So the seller has done selling their company. They moved on to this new mission or missions in their life, with the benefit of the work that we've done with our extended team to help them with family cohesion clarity on what they want to pursue, ideally with their family, and the much higher liquidity, and now they have it at their disposal to allocate wherever their values are.
No, that's great. Very cool. Well, Kevon, we're really grateful that you joined us today. As we kind of wrap up here, do you have one great tip that you'd like to share with buyers and one that you'd like to share with sellers?
Sure. For buyers, it's remember that the seller's dignity is actually part of the deal. You're not just negotiating a price and terms, you're actually negotiating a relationship. And so you want to protect that buyer's dignity. If you want to inherit or acquire more than assets, you actually want to acquire their loyalty, right? Another way to think about that is you're negotiating your relationship and your reputation, right? Not just the economics. And then for the sellers, I think we've already covered the main thing. Start preparing ideally 2 years in a small way before you think you need to, and just increase that over time, especially in the 12 months before you want to contact buyers. The best exits are actually won in the invisible phases of outfitting and preparation phase, not the marketing and controlled auction phase.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's great. That's great. Well, hey, Kevon, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really grateful for all of the wisdom and experience that you've shared with our audience. We're really passionate about this topic because we know that when great deals happen, great things happen for, not just the business owners, but also their families, their teams, the team's family, and ultimately the community at large. And that really matters. For all of our listeners, as you're thinking about buying or selling, we hope that this content has been really helpful for you because it makes a big difference. We know it's a lot of work, it's a lot of risk, there's a lot of sleepless nights, and a lot of effort that you have to put into making your deal happen. But it truly does make a big difference. And so we wish that you will have a great deal. Thank you for joining us today. For future episodes, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And please check out our website at www.goforemanlaw.com/learning.